Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear. In grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear. The hour I first believed. Oh, through many dangers, toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and it is grace that will lead me home. Yeah, how amazing, how wonderful you are. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've known less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I
and good day everyone. Welcome to our video presentation. Together with me and my partner, let's explore and determine what is the Nativist Approach. If you want to learn more about the Nativist Approach, stay tuned and watch till the end. Before we formally start the discussion about the Nativist Approach, let us, the reporters, introduce ourselves. I am Kristine P, Virgula, a Bachelor of Secondary Education major in English first-year student with the motto, Time is Gold. The objectives of this report is that at the end of the discussion, the students can determine the concept of the Nativist Approach and identify the two factors or concepts that supports the Nativist Approach. Since we were babies, we can somehow already understand the gestures and the expressions of the people around us. We can already express our feelings, just like when we feel sad, we express this through crying. And on the later stage, we can utter some short words like Baba, Mama, and Dada. And these abilities had made me confused, and I know it's not only me but all of us. Made us all confused of how does a person with such a young age has this ability, or what are the factors that influences the baby in understanding gestures and expressions at such a young age.
The Nativist Approach, or the Nativist theory, was developed by Noam Chomsky, an American linguist, cognitive scientist, and philosopher who popularized this theory in 1957 when he published Syntactic Structures and other later works.
The term nativist is derived from the fundamental assertion that language acquisition is innately determined, that we are born with a genetic capacity that predisposes us to systematic perception of language around us, resulting in the construction of an internalized system of language. This approach basically or simply tells that babies already have the ability to acquire language, specifically their native language, because we are genetically encoded with a universal grammar. And that universal grammar will be tackled at the later part of the report. So when we say genetically encoded, it is already in our genes, even since before we are still in the wombs of our mothers. According to Chomsky, this innate ability to easily learn a native language is due to two things. The first one is the language acquisition device, or the LAD, and the second one is the universal grammar, or the UG. Let us first determine what is the language acquisition device, or the LAD. The language acquisition device, or the LAD for short, is a hypothetical tool in the brain that contains specific knowledge about language and grammar. Chomsky proposed the LAD to help explain how children are able to comprehend the basic structures of language from such a young age. Chomsky suggests that a child's LAD is triggered once they hear speech. Chomsky also stated that this part of the brain is a uniquely human trait and cannot be found in other animals, which helps explain why is it only humans who can communicate through language. Chomsky believes that every babies have the language acquisition device in their brains, or a tool that stores knowledge about language and grammars. So that explains why the babies already has the ability to easily learn the native language of their parents even just by observing because they already have the knowledge about the grammar and about the language. However, we should always remember that the lad was actually readily recognized as not literally a cluster of brain cells. So basically, it is just what Chomsky believes that there is a tool or something in our brain, but not literally a part of our brain, that stores knowledge about language and grammars. The language acquisition device have four linguistic properties. The first property of the LAD is that it has the ability to distinguish speech sounds from other sounds in our environment. The second property of the LAD is that it has the ability to organize linguistic data into various classes that can later be refined or be filtered. The third linguistic property of language acquisition device is that LAD has knowledge or have knowledge that only a certain kind of linguistic system is possible and the other kinds of system are not. The fourth and the last property of the language acquisition device is that the language acquisition device have the ability to engage in constant evaluation of the developing linguistic system and of available linguistic input. Now, let's proceed to the knowledge contained within the language acquisition device or LAD, which is the universal grammar. All languages are different, and humans assign different meanings to the different sounds worldwide. Chomsky does not believe that a child born in England has an innate ability to speak English, or a child born in China can miraculously speak Chinese. Instead, he proposed that all human languages share many of the same common grammar principles. Some examples that shows all human languages share many of the same common grammar principles are the following. The first example is that most languages differentiate between verbs and nouns. The second example is that most languages have a way of talking about the past and the present. And number 3, most languages have a way of asking questions. The last example is that most languages have a counting system. The sharing of common grammar principles is what Chomsky refers to as the universal grammar, as what I have said before. According to universal grammar theory, the basic grammatical structures of language are already encoded in the human brain at birth. It is a child's environment that will determine which language they will learn. Just like the examples I have mentioned before, which is the same common grammar principles that most languages have, like the differentiation between verbs and nouns, the way of talking about past and present, the way of asking questions, and the way that most languages have a counting system. These grammar principles are already in our brain, specifically in the language acquisition device, which gives us the ability to already understand the gestures or the movements of our parents at such a young age and to easily learn our native languages. The only difference here is that we were born into different environments which have different languages. There are many researches and studies about universal grammar that attempts to discover why it is that all children, despite their environmental stimuli or the sounds they hear around them, bring to their language acquisition process. These researches and studies look specifically into the question formation, the negation, word order, the discontinuity of embedded clauses, the subject deletion, and the other grammatical phenomena. The nativist approach or the nativist theory is very controversial. One of the arguments against this view is that without a propensity for language, children will not be able to learn such complete speech patterns in a natural human environment where complete sentences are the exception. That's all for my discussion about the nativist approach. I hope that you have learned something from what I have shared to you, and continue watching because the next part of this video presentation, still about the nativist approach, will be reported or discussed by my partner.
Good day everyone, my name is Fritz C, Leono, 18 years old from Esperanza, Sultan Kudarat, and I will be your reporter for today. But before we start with our discussion, let's first read our objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students can determine the different challenges, limitations, and criticisms of Chomsky's nativist theory, and cite the important contributions of nativist framework in understanding the first language acquisition process. So let's move on to our discussion. Challenges to nativist approach. Parallel distributed processing or PDP model is based on the idea that the brain does not function in a series of activities but rather performs a range of activities at the same time, parallel to each other. The assumptions underlying this tradition is that those generative rules or items in a linguistic sense are connected serially with one connection between each pair of neurons on the brain. A messier but more fruitful picture was provided by what has come to be known as the parallel distributed processing or PDP model, based on the notion that information is processed simultaneously at several levels of attention. For example, as you read the words on the certain page, your brain is attending to letters, word juncture and meaning, syntactic relationships, textual discourse, as well as background experiences that you bring to the text. Another example is, when you see a bus coming towards you, you see its color, shape, depth, and motion all at once. A child or adult's linguistic performance may be the consequence of many levels of simultaneous neutral interconnections rather than a serial process of one rule being applied, then another, and so forth. A simple analogy to music may further illustrate this complex notion. Think of an orchestra playing a symphony. The score for the symphony may have, let's say, 12 separate parts that are performed simultaneously. The symphony of the human brain enables us to process many segments and levels of language, cognition, affect, and perception all at once, in a parallel configuration. And so, according to the PDP model, a sentence which has phonological, morphological, syntactic, lexical, semantic, discourse, sociolinguistic, and strategic properties is not generated by a series of rules. Rather, sentences are the result of the simultaneous interconnection of a multitude of brain cells. Connectionism. Closely related to the PDP concept is a brain of psycholinguistic inquiry called connectionism, in which neurons in the brain are said to form multiple connections. Each of the 100 billion nerve cells in the brain may be linked to as many as 10.000 of its counterparts. In this approach, experience leads to learning by strengthening particular connections, sometimes at the expense of weakening others. For example, the first language acquisition of English regular past tense forms by children may proceed as a series of connections. First, a child may confidently connect the form went with the verb go. Then, children will often perceive another connection, the regular ed suffix attached to a verb, and start using the word good or good. Finally, with more complex connections, children will perceive good as incorrect and maintain both connections, the ed form connected to most verbs and the went form special connection. According to such accounts, there are no rules of grammar. Instead, the systematicities of syntax emerge from the set of learned associations between language functions and based on past tense forms, with novel responses generated by online generalizations from stored examples. Emergentism. Finally, in recent years, a further development of connectionist models of language acquisition is seen in a position that oddly harkens back to the spirit of behavioral approaches. Emergentism, a perspective exposed by O'Grady 1999-2003 and McWhinney 1999 and others, holds that the complexity of language emerges from relatively simple development process being exposed to a massive and complex environment. The interactions that constitute language are associations, billions of connections which coexist within a neural system as organisms coexist within an ecosystem. And systematicities emerge as a result of their interactions and mutual constraints. This perspective disagrees sharply with earlier nativist views by suggesting that there is no inborn universal grammar or no innate grammatical system. Here are the important contributions of nativist framework in understanding the first language acquisition process. First, freedom from the restrictions of the so-called scientific method to explore the unseen, unobservable, underlying, abstract linguistic structures being developed in the child. Second, the construction of a number of potential properties of universal grammar through which we can better understand not just language acquisition but the nature of human languages in general. Third, systematic description of the child's language repertoire is either rule-governed or operating out of parallel distributed processing capacities, or the result of experiential establishment of connection. Limitations of Chomsky's theory. Chomsky's work on language was theoretical. He was interested in grammar, and much of his work consists of complex explanations of grammatical rules. He did not study real children. The theory relies on children being exposed to language but takes no account of the interaction between children and their careers. Nor does it recognize the reasons why a child might want to speak the functions of language. In 1977, Bard and Such published a study of a child known as Jim, the hearing son of deaf parents. Jim's parents wanted their son to learn speech rather than the sign language they used between themselves. He watched a lot of television and listened to the radio, therefore receiving frequent language input. However, his progress was limited until a speech therapist was enlisted to work with him. Simply being exposed to language was not enough. Without the associated interaction, it meant little to him. Subsequent theories have placed greater emphasis on the ways in which real children develop language to fulfill their needs and interact with their environment, including other people. Next is the criticisms of nativist theory. The nativist theory has been met with several criticisms. Firstly, nativism is often perceived as too theoretical and lacking scientific proof. Jeffrey Ellman et al. 1996 pointed out that it is almost impossible to judge what knowledge is innate and exactly how it could be coded in a person's genes. Secondly, Chomsky intended to look more at complex explanations of grammatical structures rather than studying actual children themselves, meaning there is little empirical evidence to validate his theory. Subsequently, Chomsky's theory fails to account for real-life relationships, external factors, and motivations to learn that children may face in their day-to-day lives. Interactionist theories such as Brunner and Vygotsky examine the biological and social perspectives to explain how children develop language. This demonstrates move away from the nativist theory as it fails to recognize the importance of social environment in language acquisition. Thirdly, although scientists have identified locations in the brain used specifically for language processing, such as Broca's areas and Wernicke's area, A specific area that could be defined as the LAD or language acquisition device has never found. That's all. Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Here's the conclusion and summary of our report. The nativist approach or nativist theory suggests that we're born with a specific language learning area in our brain, or also known as language acquisition device. The two factors that make our innate ability to easily learn a native language are language acquisition device and universal grammar. The language acquisition device is a hypothetical tool in the brain that contains specific knowledge about language and grammar. The language acquisition device have four linguistic principles. The universal grammar is the sharing of common grammar principles of all people.